Hello and welcome to Berlin Calling 6 months to lead the union. And I'm really sorry about the delay. We had some technical problems here and it's been a crazy week. So I'm Roland Freudenstein, Policy Director of the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies, the think tank of the European People's Party. And this is the last Martens Center event before a well-deserved summer break. And let me thank at this point also our partners from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and the Hans Seidel Stiftung, who are co-hosting this event today. Now we have Monika Hohlmeier, member of the European Parliament from the EPP from Germany, and the chair of the Committee on Budget Control, as well as Janusz Lewandowski, another member of the European Parliament from Poland, also EPP, and the vice chair of the Committee on Budgets. We also had, until 2 days ago, the confirmation of the German permanent representative to the European Union, Ambassador Michael Klaus. But looking at this turbulent week, he had to cancel his participation. So here goes 6 months to lead the union. I know there's a bit of hyperbole in there, but then again, looking at the magnitude of the challenge, maybe not. But before we get completely carried away, let's remember that the blueprint for the first part of our title is from a post-punk song by The Clash of 1979, London Calling. And you might remember, if you're old enough, that it has a distinctly dystopian theme. There's some food for thought here for Europe in the age of COVID-19, of course. And since we have a little more time than planned, I'd like to take this opportunity to actually reflect upon the deal of deals of last weekend. So last weekend, we witnessed European summitry, arguably at its best and its worst, depending which phase of the 4.5-day ordeal you're actually talking about. On social media, I read desperate comments of people complaining about the egoism, the lack of solidarity of the frugal four, actually now 5 with Finland, and of people accusing Charles Michel and Angela Merkel of having betrayed our fundamental values, such as the rule of law, by softening conditionality in the question of distribution of funds. And yet, I would say there was some reason for pride at having achieved a compromise on Tuesday, actually faster than expected by many, including myself. A compromise actually being, as we all know, the magical formula of European integration. And indeed, looking at the initial differences over the Next Generation Fund or Recovery Fund and the budget, the deal was indeed impressive. But the devil is in the detail, and before the deal goes to national parliaments, it will have to be approved by the European Parliament. And if we are to believe the leading figures in the European Parliament, most of all, of course, Manfred Weber this morning from the EPP, there will still be substantive changes to the existing deal. So at this point, I would like to ask Monika Hohlmeier, what exactly might those differences be? What will be the added value that the European Parliament will bring to this achievement of our leaders, of our heads of government of last weekend? The floor is yours, Monika Hohlmeier.
Thank you very much. So welcome to everybody. I'm very pleased that we have the opportunity to talk to each other, and explicitly with my very experienced colleague Janusz Lewandowski. I'm stemming from the biggest net payer. He's stemming from the country that has the biggest net receiver. Normally, those two should be opposite to each other, but we are not. We really work together in the European Parliament. And first comment, I'm happy that there is an agreement between the chiefs of state, even if we miss some points therein. So it is good that there is a negotiating, not only a negotiating box of the Council, that there is really something of a basis for negotiations. But we don't accept it as it stands at the moment. The first point is that we have 27 different member states wishing to deal with the recovery fund. Every member state on his own, perhaps 30% for climate goals, but every member state for itself. And the problem is that I'm missing really the European goals. So a European strategy for hydrogen, a European strategy for space, a European strategy that we are following really for the climate goals. These cannot be solved via 27 member states projects. They can contribute, yes, but to realize really a European strategic point of view, there we need a European strategy and not one that is distributed in between 27 member states. The second issue that I see is parts of innovation, parts of certain programs will be in the recovery fund, but the recovery fund will end on 2023 in spending, or 2024 at the end. And this means that after 3 years, there will be a full stop, and then we have to live with this very small amount of MFF. This MFF is an MFF without Brexit, but it is explicitly an MFF that is even under the crisis MFF of last time. And this I see really very critical, that at the end, the MFF has a very low figure, that the innovation and research therein has not the increase that is needed for the goals that we have to achieve. Explicitly, if we want to be competitive with China and the United States, if we see the kind of state subsidies that are against the WTO standards, but they don't care about it. If we see the Russian pressure on European Union member states, try to divide us, try to infiltrate certain member states and to get more influence against the United Europe. There I see that we really need a stronger focus on research and on innovation. Next issue, important issue, is the rule of law. I think that the rule of law has been weakened strongly. The chiefs of state agreed, this is a positive point, on certain ameliorations for the control of money. But at the end, we can control perhaps sometimes parts of the programs that are in member states' hands. But at the end, if they are working incorrectly, or if there is even fraudulent work and the justice system is not working, then we cannot do anything. So the rule of law mechanism that was presented by the Commission in 2018, perhaps we have to change it a little bit, but this should be decided at the same time that the MFF is decided. And the last very important point, I had the impression that chiefs of member states are always thinking, oh, it was already very hard to discuss to each other on the level of chiefs of state. Oh, we don't want that parliaments are intervening therein. So we have to clarify the possibilities of the European Parliament to not only to control, but to be part of the kind of programming, to have a say in the programming, to have a say in the European semester, and to be on the same level as the member states are. The issue is that 750 billion are spent without any control of Parliament. You may imagine that the Parliament cannot accept this point of view of the chiefs of state. At the end, they really wanted to have an intergovernmental control and even not to give it to the Commission. So may I say, we are a parliamentary democracy. And without rule of law and parliamentary democracy, there's really a loss of major values that we always protected in the European Union.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I completely understand your point. But let me just ask this one follow-up question here. If the Parliament rejects the deal as it stands, and you know how much effort and pain went into getting this compromise, aren't you actually risking a massive further delay in the disbursement of urgently needed funds in this corona crisis? Do you think that governments like the Dutch or other frugal five governments will actually see your point and will actually agree to increase the entire budget as it was decided, and will at the same time agree to a stricter control of the European Parliament, which will complicate things?
No, I think the most complicated first is that the member states delayed the deal. It was not the Parliament. The Parliament was very clear, always on the path, always asking the member states, start to decide. You have to decide. You have to decide, and member states were not able to decide. So it was not the Parliament delaying it. Secondly, if you have a parliamentary democracy, then it's very clearly that chiefs of state can decide on their level, but at the end, they are not the co-decision part. The co-decision part are Parliament and member states. So the Commission is making a proposal. So then you would, if this kind of question is raised, then I always say, okay, then you need an autocratic system. Then please say goodbye to parliamentary democracy, because then parliaments and parliamentarians would be there only to say yes, what their chiefs are doing. So that's a Putin system. We are not in a Putin system. We are in a democratic, very lively European system. So this means that the parliamentarians will have to play a role, because member states are thinking for themselves. The European strategy, more and more, I have the impression, has to come from the European Parliament and from the Commission, because member states at the moment are always fighting. We want to have money I want to have money for my member state. So if everybody is thinking like this, then we never will have a European strategy and a European competitiveness. So very clearly said, this is now the position of the Council. Now we are entering in negotiations. So we are just saying that the proposal as it stands, we are not accepting, but we are constructive. We want to negotiate. We want to be quick. We wanted to have help already in 2020. This was refused by the member states. We wanted to have already from September and October on. Member states refused it. So who is delaying?
I thank you so much for putting this in such a charming manner. Now, Charles Lewandowski, two questions to you. First of all, this difference, strategic, I would say, difference between the Parliament's views and the heads of government on the other side, is that understood by the citizens of the European Union? Do they really follow this conflict of interest and conflict of viewpoints? And second question to you would be, what exactly will most likely be changed in the upcoming days and weeks?
First of all, thank you for your invitation to this timely debate. Probably Robert Lewandowski would be more exciting as a partner, but he is busy with Bayern München now. Your question is a really fundamental question, because for the man in the street, Europe is to deliver money and to release the tensions over coronavirus problem and recession, which is a consequence of coronavirus. But as I hear so much about Europe that is not rising to the challenges of today, I have to mention before budget, the so-called investment initiative from March, absolute flexibilization of remaining structural funds, then relaxation of state aid, relaxation of the Stability and Growth Pact, and a huge package coming before budget for 540 billion euro. That is about loans via European Stabilization Mechanism, European Investment Bank, and a very special SURE program by the European Commission. And now to the budget. This is about good news for Europe. Late, very late agreement, really very late agreement, but late agreement is better than disagreement. There are always special, this is never business as usual, to design, to negotiate, and to implement so-called MFF. I remember that 2004-5, this was about huge historical big bang enlargement of the European Union, but only net beneficiaries coming, no one net payer coming after 2004. So frugal, we are more frugal on this occasion. And when I was designing the European budget, this was amidst the deep financial crisis. So we were asking governments for austerity, and this was not a good climate with Prime Minister Cameron at the table to ask for a much bigger budget. And now, the difference, Monica is right, what are the major differences. I really see recovery part as a big success really. Enormous effort by the to agree. MFS is short of expectations of the European Parliament. My problem is, and probably the problem of the European Parliament, that the men in the street ready to welcome flow of money since January 2021 is not so much interested in the interinstitutional problems. This is beyond his imagination, beyond his expectations, but really this is not the blame this is not the fault of the European Parliament, because since May 2018, Parliament was in this very uncomfortable wait-and-see position until this week. So now this is extremely ambitious timetable, extremely important and challenging challenge for the German presidency to make it happen at the beginning of the next year. Normally, the ratification of the new own resources ceiling, which is necessary, the shortest period I remember was 18 months. It has to be done within 6 months now. So a huge responsibility of the German presidency. I am afraid that this is not so much interesting for the men in the street from Portugal, from Iceland, from Germany. They want Europe to deliver, because this is a test of utility of Europe in the crisis environment.
So if I understood you correctly, there is still time until the end of the year to deal with the European Parliament and with all the national parliaments for ratification, so that the disbursement can begin in January 2021. Is that correct?
That is my optimistic assumption, very optimistic assumption, as the timetable from the very beginning was extremely ambitious. Now, Parliament is rejecting the MFF part of the package, short of our expectations, really, as it was usually. So member states and leaders are defending their national portfolios in agriculture and in cohesion at the cost of what we call future-oriented priorities, Horizon research, Erasmus. I remember that this was usually so. National portfolios in the last minute, last night, are strongly defended, what we call future-oriented priorities, and so important for the Parliament. This is normally deeply reduced, and this is the case right now. So Parliament is rejecting MFF part of the package in order to enter into the real negotiations, because nothing of real negotiations was on part of the Parliament so far. But we welcome recovery, and we want to deliver timely recovery program to the citizens of Europe. Now we have a summer break, but it's not good. That is why we have a problem because really we are to start in September. We need ratification of the own resources ceiling. We need agreement with Parliament, and we need a lot of agreements over sectoral regulations to launch the sectoral programs. Extremely ambitious, but everybody knows that we are now under this extraordinary expectations and challenges. So let's go.
Indeed, let's go. And this is, as you said, a huge challenge for the German Council Presidency. Monica Hohlmeier, I mean, do you think that the Germans are up to it? Do you think that Germany, by its switch from its classical position of distrusting debt, distrusting a centralization of funds in the European Union, do you think Germany has made a fundamental change in the political landscape of the European Union? And is that the precondition for success in this crisis, that Europe can actually help itself get out of the crisis?
I think that there is really a change in position of a lot of member states, not only Germany, because this pandemic was showing us that we were not prepared enough. There were member states hit. They were not responsible for this situation. This is not an economic crisis or a bank crisis because of failure of acting of administration or of controllers or bank authorities or financial market authorities. This is a real crisis caused by a disease. So the debates from 2008 that we are all knowing that they were a lot of mistakes by governments or whatever. This kind of debate is nearly not existing in our debate now. It's more a discussion: how can we prevent? How can we make the member states more resilient against these kinds of hits? How can we prepare us better? How can we recover the companies? Because from the point of view of Germany, we need economic partners. Without the economic partners in other member states, our export will be hit in a very, very strong way. And then not only other member states are losing working places, not only other member states are hit by Asian buying strategies, let's say it like this. We are all hit at the end. So the new decision is that we really allow altogether that the European Union will have depth for a certain time. What I'm criticizing is that the repayment of the debts is very late and very long. So if we will face a new crisis in 10 years, in 15 years, then I think we should pay back as early as possible and as consequent as possible. So this kind of paying back mechanism that we have now is seen very critically. Because at the end, we are spending money in 3 years and we are paying back for 38 years. So if there is another crisis, then we are facing problems. So, but there is really a change of position explicitly of the frugal five and of Germany and even of France, because France at the same time did not want to have debts in the European Union. The positions have changed. Yes, that's true.
Okay. I wanted to ask also Janusz Lewandowski about this question of what if there is a second crisis that Monica Hohlmeier just brought up. And I would also like to ask you additionally, what was just described, that's the attitude of many in the EPP group. But would that be a majority view in the European Parliament?
But the European Parliament is a democratic body with, and this is management of diversity, and it should stay.
Sure.
Because this is all about the European Union. Everybody is talking about so-called democratic deficit in the European Union, but the paradox of crisis situations is that in crisis situation, as it was 2008, 2011, and now 2020, we have a lot of intergovernmental ad hoc agreements because they are needed as quickly as possible. So Parliament is in crisis situation left behind. Although everybody would like to improve this deficit, democratic deficit, crisis situations are helping ad hoc intergovernmental deals. And here is the story of a recent deal in Brussels and expectations that Parliament should react with agreement as quickly as possible. As for your last question, I see the difference in approach, more constructive approach, and that is also interesting to see evolution in Germany, not necessarily towards the interventions of European Central Bank, because we should see also interventions of European Central Bank. And I know that there are problems with accepting these interventions of European Central Bank. But as for the mutualization of that sort of program as recovery, here is a change of attitude of a major net payer. Although there are precedences of mutualization, for example, balance of payments facility for non-euro countries. This is built on borrowing, built on guarantees of the European budget. So probably if something happens, this is about mutualization of debt, but never to such an extent, because this is about enormous intervention of borrowing of the European Commission. The European Commission is now one of the biggest players worldwide in the financial markets. This is the range of 750 billion euro for recovery program. This is 100 billion euro loans for so to say sure program. This is about compensating losses in payments, salaries, wages throughout Europe. So that is almost equal to the interventions of European Central Bank. But this is absolutely something new. Absolutely something new. And the biggest weakness already identified in the Parliament is, of course, repayment scheme. Repayment that is coming after 2027 of this huge borrowing in the markets. And now we are to pay only interests. And if this is not about new own resources for European Union, the other possibilities is to reduce future multi-annual frameworks, multi-annual budgets, or additional input from the national governments. And it could be very difficult if one more crisis happens. Please remember that now we have accumulation of problems. We have to build Green Deal. The original proposal by the Commission was very much under the influence of migration crisis from 2015. Therefore, new funds, migration, asylum, reinforcing border, and we have Brexit. We have Brexit at the end of the year. So we have accumulation of problems. I do believe that I am optimistic about free society and democratic society that is raising to the expectations, but I don't wish the European Union one more crisis. I was living through this. Now we have accumulation, Brexit, Green Deal as a chance, how to face the recession, how to finance Green Deal, how to finance migration and border protection. Well, this is good for German, but we have German presidency now under That's the driving seat.
Well, thank you. Indeed, I think we've had our share of crises in the last 20 years. But you mentioned freedom and democracy, and actually we already have one question from a participant, from a listener, referring to precisely the rule of law question. And Monica Hohlmeier, you briefly mentioned it before, but let's become a tiny bit more precise here. So originally in the Commission proposal that was on the table since actually 2018 already,
Yes.
it was the idea of a reverse qualified majority. In other words, not only would there be conditionality about the rule of law in a given country for funds to be disbursed to that country, but in order to topple this, a qualified majority would be necessary in order to prevent it. In other words, it would be rather difficult for individual countries that were being criticized because of lack of rule of law. It would be very difficult for those countries to undo this conditionality and to get the funds nevertheless. So this has been changed in the deal of last weekend. Now, there are points that are not entirely clear. One is indeed the shift from a reverse qualified majority to a qualified majority. In other words, it takes a qualified majority to decide not to disburse funds to a given country because of rule of law concerns. Okay, well, that much is clear. But the other point is that the Council will revert very quickly or as soon as possible to this issue. So in other words, the last word is not spoken. Okay, what is the attitude of the majority of the European Parliament, and how realistic is it that we will see substantial changes in this point? And how would it look like?
I think that the Commission will make a new proposal, a slightly reversed one. At the moment, we are in the situation that Article 7, so-called Article 7 procedure, doesn't make sense at all at the moment, because you need unanimity of the member states. So a unanimity of the member states never was reached because different member states are helping each other. So explicitly, those who have been in the focus of the rule of law mechanism, which are criticized at the moment. We see a step in the right direction. Let's be friendly. But this step that the member states have gone were too friendly to those breaching our fundamental rules of rule of law. Without rule of law, there is no freedom, because freedom needs a strong rule of law legislation. And if rule of law is violated, then you won't have this media freedom, the independence of the judges, a fair nomination procedure of judges that are not only nominated by a president or by the majority in government, leading the government, or creating oligarch structures that are normally known for former communist states, but not for European member states of the European Union. So I think that there is a very clear majority in the Parliament to put pressure on the Council that the rule of law mechanism won't be delayed for the next 5 years. So if MFF and the recovery fund has to be decided, I hope that the Parliament will be tough enough to say, then we at once, at the same time, want to decide on the rule of law mechanism. Because rule of law is the basis of everything. Is the basis of media freedom, is the basis of our justice system, is the basis of our civil society, and is the basis for checks and balances. So freedom is not existing without rule of law. And this means I think Parliament will be strong on this point to have negotiations at the same time together with MFF and Recovery Fund.
Okay, let me just, on this very important question, turn to Janusz Lewandowski. I mean, your home country, Poland, is one of those two which are expected to help each other with vetoes in the Article 7 procedure. And it's one of those two governments, I have to say, not countries, one of those two governments in Poland and Hungary, which claim that the whole talk about rule of law is just a way of politicizing European legislation and a way of politicizing actually the disbursement of funds, and to go against governments that are different from the majority of the governments in the European Union. So it's singling out particular governments and punishing them for not agreeing with West European political correctness. I'm putting it in paraphrase here. So, but how do you respond to this accusation of a politicized abuse of the concept of rule of law?
Well, I fully agree with Monica. So the biggest net beneficiary in full agreement with the biggest net payer to the budget. Our union is built on values, should be built on values. Everybody who is coming to our common European house should stick to the rules of our common European house. And that's true that the compromise with Hungary, Poland is about weakening rule of law conditionality, which is something new. We have macroeconomic conditionality in the European budget. Now we have very much weakened rule of law conditionality. I think the position of Parliament is very much to reinforce that sort of rule of law conditionality. Now we have a huge debate in Poland whether it exists or it was killed in agreement. And of course, I am now in opposition, so my position is completely different from the position of our government. Luckily, I have to say and have to mention, we have not only the stick, which is weakened now and heavily disputed in Poland, that is rule of law conditionality, but we have also a carrot. Carrot is in form of so-called instrument of values, reinforcing and supplying a civil society and non-governmental organization via the European budget. So we have both weakened rule of law stick and quite important, given the experience of Hungary and Poland, support for non-governmental organizations. I do believe that Parliament holds strong position on sticking to the values of our House.
Okay, we have another question here concerning the so-called new initiatives, for example, on EU defense-related proposals. Current Council proposal is from minus 39% to minus 74%, less than the original Commission proposal. So what does the current Council agreement mean for those so-called new initiatives, such as the new instruments for EU defense? And this question is from Tommy Huchtanen, the Martin Center Executive Director. So who would like to respond to this question that takes defense expenditure as an example?
I was already, Monica, I should try.
Yeah.
I was already responding because the logic of negotiations in the final rounds, intergovernmental, is to cut so-called common goals of the European Union and to defend national portfolios that are, of course, in cohesion and in agriculture. And this was the logic of last night, the negotiations also this time. This was the same 2014, 2006, and 2020. We are not happy with these cuts in defense because we are in the Trump era. Trump era is somehow challenging what was the basis of our safety, that is this cross-Atlantic civilization and cross-Atlantic solidarity. So I would be very much in favor of reinforcing defense budget of European Union, because this is no longer a leaf from geopolitics. We are in an era of instability, much more dangerous for our safety than it was at the end of last century, when optimism was prevailing. This was Europe was the old continent, but like a new brave world after the historical extension of European Union with our part of Europe. And now we are living in the era of Trump. I am not wishing him prolongation of his presidency, but to make us safe, we should be more resilient, we were self-sufficient in our safety and defense.
Thank you very much. And before giving the floor to Monica Hohlmeier, I'd like to add here for everyone that, of course, even if Trump will not be re-elected, the new administration certainly will not want to revert to the bad old times when America was basically guaranteeing Europe's security and Europeans not doing enough of their own in the eyes of both Republicans and Democrats in Washington. So even with a President Biden, Europe will have to step up its defense efforts. I mean, that is absolutely guaranteed. But Monica Hohlmeier, you might want to add an aspect here.
I wanted to say the new budget is better than nothing, but not as good as we wish to have it. Because we saw there a possibility to strengthen the European role in NATO together with member states, to have more synergies in research and innovation, and in buying certain instruments in the area of defense. Explicitly changing the method that every member state wants to have its own kind of helicopter, even if it's the same goal and for the same military purposes. If you see the billions that member states are spending, then we see that we are really ineffective. But at the same time, I see that member states still are not prepared to really cooperate in a very strong and united way on the European level. I'm not asking for a harmonized army culture or changing all the different cultures of our different member states' army organizations or military organizations. That's not what we are talking about. I'm talking about technical innovation. I'm talking about to have a better organization and a better equipment for our armies, because it is not rare that European member states need the airplanes of the United States, need weapons of the United States, and this costs us a lot of reputation. And this is misleading the American president always to blame us. We are playing our role, but we are not acting as united as it would be positive for our military structures and for our defense systems. We could be better with the same amount of money if we would use more synergies and if we would spend more money in a united and synergetic way.
Thank you very much. I have another question here from Gonzalo Carrizo. From the last European Council, I would say that the EU is walking the talk on the economic side of the pandemic, but it's walking the walk, but it keeps talking the talk on powering the EU towards the future vis-a-vis China and the US. So in other words, it's not fulfilling, it's not punching equal to its weight on China and the US. So on the common EU priorities like the Green Deal, digital transformation, and even on resilience, heads of state opted to do it on their own. How can the EU keep advocating and selling to citizens EU unity, EU sovereignty, the slogan "Together we're stronger," but then act otherwise? Is this, in the view of the panelists, the right approach, thinking globally? I think we have partly answered this, but maybe Monica Hohlmeier, you would like to reinforce that point and just rub it in that we cannot let the member states do this nation by nation.
We cannot solve the competitiveness, the strength of the European Union only by doing all programs in 7 member states, and the 27 member states are programming everybody on its own, their own programs. So this is why the European Parliament first is asking for a role in the programming period, because there is, for example, foreseen that 30% should go to climate goals. Okay, when it should go to climate goals, then there must be a common strategy, for example, on hydrogen infrastructure, because it's not very helpful to have research for hydrogen, for new technologies, and then at the end we don't have the infrastructure to roll it out, because one member state has to decide not to contribute to this kind of infrastructure. This is only one example. So we have really to streamline in the climate area and in the digitalization area the member states' programs, and even in some other areas. Secondly, we have to try to get some more billions in research and innovation on the European level, because there are several areas, not only climate. There is the area of aeronautics. I don't know how to realize with Boeing the Green Deal. So we want to realize the Green Deal with Airbus and with a lot of European suppliers and producers in the sector of aeronautics. In the space program, we cannot have a Polish space, a Bavarian space, a North Rhine-Westphalian space, a French space. We have a common European space strategy. And there we have to really to step up, because United States are paying a lot of money via the military area to SpaceX. They are paying to Boeing. So they are subsidizing private companies with a lot of money of the United States, with a lot of subsidies. So we have to be very careful that we are not losing our competitiveness, because we try to be 100% correct while the others are really violating all rules. The same is valid for China. So I think very clearly, innovation and research, we must fight there for really more money. We must fight for the possibility of the Parliament to be part of the programming, so that not everything is only going in 27 directions, and at the end, rule of law stays on the same line. So our goals are in this direction, where what this discussion is asking now.
Thank you. Janusz Lewandowski, one sentence, and then I'll wrap up.
Unfortunately, crisis situations are not good for community method. There is a time of renationalization, but Europe cannot overregulate. It should be built on the subsidiarity principle. Europe has to be big in big things. Climate, research, security, these are big things, but not to overregulate the daily life of the citizens of Europe.
That's perfect.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'd like to finish at this point with maybe the 3 takeaways here, 3-4 takeaways. I think there's the overarching takeaway of the European Parliament's reaction to the deal of last weekend is that if the Commission has such an enhanced role now because of the taking the credit. If the Council and the member state governments are, as usual in a crisis, now trying to take more power to themselves, the Parliament has to emphasize the democracy aspect and the aspect that the European Parliament needs more of a say in all these decisions that have been taken. And that's why there will be changes. And, you know, more specifically, I'll just dish out the slogans here. Rule of law has to be strengthened. It cannot remain at the stage it is in now in the current deal. Innovation in all its forms has to be emphasized much more and has to actually receive more funds, more resources. And finally, and most importantly, we have to think as a whole and not as 27 different member states. And this should be a leitmotif of the changes that are now coming in the budgetary deal, and that, of course, the German Council Presidency will have to enact and will have to lead on in the months to come till the end of the year. And I think that's all for today. Thank you so much for being here, Janusz Lewandowski, Monika Hohlmeier. Thanks to our co-hosts here, and of course to all the participants, to the questioners, and so on. And see you again after summer. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to you as well.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.